The emergency lights pulsed an ominous crimson throughout the Galactic Concorde's flagship, the Eternal Vigilance. Admiral Zixnath's tentacles twitched with poorly concealed agitation as the hollow projection displayed yet another supply convoy lost to the strange temporal anomalies that had been plaguing their trade routes for the past 3 months. The Chrono Weavers struck again, announced Commander Keldar, his reptilian scales flaring with frustration. An entire battle group caught in what appears to be a recursive time loop. We've lost contact with over 3,000 personnel. Murmurs of dismay rippled through the war room. The gathered representatives of the Galactic Concorde, a coalition of 17 spacefaring species united for mutual protection and prosperity, exchanged worried glances. The Chrono Weavers had appeared seemingly from nowhere, mysterious entities that manipulated localized time fields with devastating precision. Conventional weapons proved useless against them. Energy beams phased out of sync. Kinetic projectiles froze mid-trajectory or accelerated unpredictably. Even the Concorde's experimental temporal dampeners only seemed to make matters worse. Our standard battle protocols are useless, his science director Vexenar, a Volnax whose species prided themselves on logical analysis. The entities appear to anticipate our every move, creating localized temporal distortions that render our weapons ineffective. Then we must strike with overwhelming force, bellowed General Kthar, slamming his massive fist against the table. The Kthar warrior caste was known throughout the galaxy for their preference for direct action. We cannot allow these abominations to continue disrupting our supply lines. Violence is not the answer, countered Ambassador Luminera, her luminescent form pulsing with gentle blue light. The Laminians were among the oldest species in the Concorde, their wisdom born from millennia of peaceful exploration. These entities may be attempting communication through temporal manipulation. We must seek understanding before conflict. The debate escalated, voices overlapping in a cacophony of proposed strategies and theoretical explanations. Species that had peacefully coexisted for centuries now found themselves at odds, their frustration and fear manifesting as accusation and blame. In the corner of the room, Captain Eva Rostova sat silently. The human representative appeared unremarkable compared to the diverse array of alien dignitaries. While others gestured dramatically with multiple limbs or communicated through bioluminescent displays, Rostova simply observed, occasionally making notes on her personal datapad. Her attention seemed fixed on the complex three-dimensional data streams showing the temporal anomalies patterns. "What about the humans?" asked Vexenar suddenly, his compound eyes swiveling toward Rostova. "They've contributed nothing to this discussion. Earth weaklings understand nothing of advanced temporal physics," sneered Science Minister Krell of the Zithian Collective. Their primitive civilization barely mastered faster-than-light travel within the last century. Commander Burak, an Artoth with silvery skin and 4 arms, observed Rostova from across the table. Unlike the others, his expression held something beyond the familiar annoyance that many Concorde species felt toward humanity's recent inclusion in their alliance. There was unease in his gaze, perhaps even apprehension. Burak had served alongside humans before. He remembered Captain Nakamura during the hive mind incursion 5 years ago. The human had been similarly quiet during the strategic meetings, right before proposing a solution that many had considered savage in its elegance. The memory sent an involuntary shiver through Burak's exoskeleton. "Captain Rostova," he called out, his voice cutting through the ongoing arguments. "You've been notably silent. Does Earth have nothing to contribute to this crisis?" The room fell quiet as attention shifted to the human. Rostova looked up from her datapad, her expression neutral. "I'm still analyzing the data," she said simply, her voice lacking the emotional inflection that characterized most of the other species' communications. "When I have something useful to add, I will speak." The dismissive response might have provoked outrage, but an urgent message flashed across the central holodeck, interrupting any potential confrontation. "Priority alert," announced the ship's AI. Temporal anomaly detected at Outpost Erebus. The station reports multiple simultaneous timelines manifesting within the habitat ring. The hollow projection shifted to show Outpost Erebus, a crucial strategic location housing over 20,000 Concord citizens and serving as a primary research facility. The station's structural integrity was fluctuating wildly as parts of it seemed to exist in different time frames simultaneously, some sections aging rapidly while others reversed their entropy. "By the cosmic egg," whispered Ambassador Luminera, her light dimming in horror. "They're targeting civilian populations now." Admiral Zixnath's tentacles coiled tightly around his command staff. "This is no longer just a strategic threat. This is an existential crisis. I'm elevating the situation to threat level Omega." The pronouncement sent a wave of dread through the assembled representatives. In the 300-year history of the Galactic Concord, threat level Omega had only been declared twice before. Both incidents had resulted in catastrophic loss of life. Throughout the ensuing chaos of emergency protocols being initiated, Commander Borak noticed that Captain Rostova hadn't even looked up from her datapad. Her fingers moved rapidly across its surface, running calculations or simulations of some kind. And in that moment, Borak felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental controls. When humans got quiet like this, the galaxy should worry. The emergency session reconvened 6 hours later. The situation had deteriorated further. 3 more outposts had reported temporal incursions, and the battle group caught in the time loop was now experiencing accelerated aging. The images from their distress signals showed crew members oscillating between youth and advanced age, their bodies unable to maintain temporal cohesion. The Temporal Physics Division proposes creating a series of micro-black holes to bend space-time around the affected regions, announced Science Director Vexenar, projecting a complex set of equations. By inducing specific gravitational waves, we might counteract the Chrono Weaver's influence. "Insanity," objected Minister Krell. "The gravitational cascade could tear apart half the sector." "What about the synchronized psionic wave suggestion from the Lemnian delegation?" asked Admiral Zixnath. "Ambassador Luminera, your proposal?" The Lemnians' form brightened. "We believe a coordinated effort by our telepathic adepts could create a consciousness field capable of stabilizing the temporal fluctuations. The Chrono Weavers appear to respond to thought patterns." "Based on what evidence?" interrupted General Kthar. "We've seen no indication these entities have any form of consciousness. They're like natural disasters, not sentient beings." The arguments intensified, growing more desperate and fantastical with each passing minute. Proposals range from detonating a chain of supernovas to create a temporal firebreak, to evacuating entire star systems and surrendering them to the Chrono Weavers as feeding grounds. Commander Borak watched as factions began to form, species aligning based on ancient allegiances or philosophical similarities. The unity of the Concord was fracturing under the pressure. And still, Captain Rostova remained silent in her corner, continuing to analyze data streams only she could see on her personal device. Unable to contain his mounting discomfort, Borak approached her. "Captain," he said quietly, "your continued silence is becoming conspicuous. If Earth has insights to offer, now would be the time." Several nearby delegates turned to observe the exchange, conversations temporarily halting. Rostova looked up, her gaze direct and unsettlingly calm. "I'm still processing the information." "Processing what exactly?" pressed Borak. "We have the combined scientific expertise of 17 advanced civilizations working on this problem. What additional analysis could one human possibly contribute?" A subtle shift occurred in Rostova's expression, so slight that most non-humans would miss it entirely. The corner of her mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. "Perhaps a different perspective," she replied. Admiral Zixnath noticed the exchange. "Captain Rostova, if Earth has a proposal, the floor is yours. We face extinction. Pride and protocol have no place here." The room fell silent as Rostova stood, placing her data pad on the table. She activated its projection function, displaying a series of equations and temporal mapping diagrams that few in the room fully understood. Your fundamental assumptions about the Chrono Weavers are incorrect, she began without preamble. You're treating them as entities that control time, but my analysis suggests they're actually condensed temporal paradoxes, knots in the space-time fabric itself. Confused murmurs spread through the room. Impossible, declared Minister Krell. Temporal paradoxes can't maintain stable existence. They would collapse under their own contradictions. In normal space-time, yes, agreed Rostova. But what if they originated from a dimension where our physical laws don't apply? What if they're intrusions from a reality where paradoxes are the norm, not the exception? She manipulated her projection, showing the complex waveform patterns recorded during Chrono Weaver encounters. They're not enemies to fight. They're phenomena to be unraveled. And how do you propose we unravel them? Asked Science Director Vexen R., his tone dripping with skepticism. Rostova's response was delivered with the same emotional detachment one might use to describe making a cup of coffee. Stop trying to counter their temporal manipulations. Instead, weaponize their paradoxical nature against them. I propose creating a controlled temporal resonance feedback loop. The ensuing silence was profound. Even General Kthar, usually quick with bellicose responses, appeared stunned. That's theoretical insanity, whispered Dr. Zeiler, an Xylosian physicist who had been quietly observing from the side of the room. His spindly frame straightened with apparent interest. Explain, demanded Admiral Zixnath. Rostova adjusted her projection, showing a schematic that combined several technologies in configurations that made several scientists in the room visibly uncomfortable. We don't destroy the Weavers through force. We amplify their inherent paradoxical nature until they contradict themselves out of existence at their point of origin. Her fingers traced the diagram's energy flow. By modifying the experimental temporal field generator from Research Station Gamma, combining it with energy harvested from a captured Chrono Weaver fragment, and navigating the entire process using the Rand-Nakamura theoretical framework, we can create a resonance that will cause the Weavers to self-negate. The reaction was immediate and hostile. Madness, shouted Minister Krell. The Rand-Nakamura equations are purely theoretical. No practical application has ever been attempted because the risks of catastrophic space-time collapse are too great. You're suggesting we tear a hole in reality itself, added Science Director Vexen AR. This violates every safety protocol the Concord has established. General Kthar leaned forward, his massive form casting shadows across the table. And where would we obtain this Chrono Weaver fragment? We can barely detect these entities, let alone capture part of one. We already have one, Rostova replied calmly. Research Station Gamma collected a fragment during the first encounter 3 months ago. It's been kept in temporal stasis for study. That information is classified, said Admiral Zixnath, his tentacles writhing in agitation. How did you? Earth intelligence has its methods, Rostova interrupted. The point is, we have the necessary components. Now we need to decide if we're willing to use them. The room erupted into chaos. Ethical objections mingled with scientific counterarguments and security concerns. Some delegates even suggested Rostova's proposal might be a human plot to destabilize the Concord from within. Through it all, Rostova stood impassive, waiting for the storm to subside. When the clamor finally diminished, she spoke again, her voice cutting through the remaining murmurs with surprising authority. I understand your concerns, but consider our alternatives. She gestured to the holographic display, showing the growing list of affected systems. The micro-black hole approach has a 17% chance of success and a 63% chance of causing a gravitational cascade that would destroy this entire sector. The psionic wave proposal cannot be deployed in time to save the affected stations. She pulled up a simulation on her datapad. My model gives the temporal resonance feedback loop a 38% chance of success, with localized reality distortions as the primary risk. 38% is hardly reassuring, observed Ambassador Luminera. It's better odds than we currently have, replied Rostova. And the alternative is watching the Chrono Weavers consume our reality piece by piece. A tense silence fell over the war room. Admiral Zixnath's gaze swept across the assembled representatives, weighing their expressions against the projected casualty reports continuously updating on the holodeck. We need time to consider this, he finally said. Such a radical approach requires. An urgent alert interrupted him, its blaring tone indicating the highest priority. Temporal anomaly detected in the Vega system, announced the ship's AI. Chrono Weaver signatures surrounding Concord Fleet Division 7. Temporal distortions affecting all 17 vessels. Life support systems failing. Vega was less than 6 light-years from their current position. The Chrono Weavers were no longer a distant threat. They were on the Concord's doorstep. Admiral Zixnath's tentacles coiled tightly. How long until a full assessment of Captain Rostova's plan can be completed? He asked Science Director Vexenar. A proper scientific review would require weeks, possibly months, replied the Volnax. The theoretical framework alone. We don't have months, interrupted Commander Borak. We barely have hours. The Admiral's compound eyes fixed on Rostova. You believe this will work? I believe it's our best option, she answered. After a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Admiral Zixnath made his decision. Assemble a team. Classified status. Highest security protocols. Captain Rostova will lead, with Commander Borak as Concord oversight. His gaze swept the room. We need a temporal physicist and an engineering expert. I'll go, said Dr. Zeiler, the Xylosian physicist who had shown interest earlier. I've studied the Rand Nakamura frameworks. I'm perhaps the only one here who partly understands what the human is proposing. And I'll handle the engineering challenges, rumbled a deep voice from the back. A massive, stone-skinned Gronder stepped forward, his crystalline eyes glinting in the emergency lighting. Engineer Trask, structural systems specialist. If you're planning to build something that won't disintegrate when reality starts bending, you'll need me. Admiral Zixnath nodded grimly. Then it's decided. Operation. He paused, looking to Rostova. Temporal Gambit, she supplied. Operation Temporal Gambit is authorized. May the cosmic forces forgive us if we're wrong. As the room cleared, Commander Borak found himself alone with Rostova for a moment. The human was already reviewing data on her pad, seemingly unaffected by the weight of responsibility that had just been placed on her shoulders. This plan of yours, Borak said quietly. Have you known it was the solution all along? Is that why you've been so silent? Rostova looked up, her expression inscrutable. I needed to be certain. And are you? Certain. She considered the question carefully before answering. As certain as anyone can be when dealing with paradoxes. Borak felt that same chill he'd experienced earlier. The last time I worked with a human who was this calm before a mission, half a solar system ended up as a navigation hazard. For the first time, Rostova's lips curved into a small smile. Let's hope for better results this time. Somehow, that smile did nothing to ease Borak's discomfort. The first challenge facing Operation Temporal Gambit was acquiring the experimental temporal field generator from Research Station Gamma. Under normal circumstances, such technology would be transported with an escort fleet and multiple layers of security clearance. But with the Chrono Weavers spreading throughout Concord space, traditional protocols had to be abandoned. The team boarded a modified scout vessel, small enough to avoid detection, but large enough to accommodate the generator and the specialized equipment they would need to build their device. Trask had spent the last 12 hours reinforcing the ship's structural integrity fields and installing additional power relays to handle the enormous energy requirements of Rostova's plan. Dr. Zeiler had been less visibly productive, spending most of his time muttering over equations and occasionally engaging Rostova in hushed technical discussions that left the rest of the crew baffled. The Xylosian's spindly fingers would trace patterns in the air as he spoke, mapping invisible mathematical constructs. I still don't understand how you intend to create a stable resonance pattern, Zeiler said as their ship approached Research Station Gamma. The Rand-Nakamura equations suggest any attempt to create a temporal feedback loop would result in immediate cascading entropy. That's because you're approaching it from a conventional temporal mechanics perspective, replied Rostova, manipulating a simulation on her datapad. The key insight in the modified framework is recognizing that temporal paradoxes have their own internal logic, their own mathematics, which violates every established physical law, countered Zeiler. Only in our reality, said Rostova. What if the chrono-weavers come from a realm where our physical laws are the aberrations? The conversation was interrupted as they docked with Research Station Gamma. The station's director, a Volnax named Xerix, met them with obvious reluctance. Admiral Zixnath has authorized this transfer, he said, his compound eyes narrowing. But I must register my formal objection. The temporal fragment is the most dangerous object in Concord custody. Removing it from containment, let alone attempting to harvest energy from it, violates 17 different safety protocols. Your objection is noted, replied Commander Borak. Now, please direct us to the containment area. The fragment was smaller than Borak had expected. A crystalline shard no larger than his hand, suspended in a specialized temporal stasis field. Unlike normal matter, it seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously, its edges blurring and shifting as if it couldn't decide on a definitive form. Beautiful, whispered Dr. Zeiler, leaning close to the containment field. A physical manifestation of temporal uncertainty. It's killed 3 researchers, Director Xerix reminded them sharply. Those who observed it too long reported experiencing their past and future simultaneously before their neural pathways collapsed. We'll take appropriate precautions, assured Rostova, signaling to Trask to prepare the specialized containment unit they had brought. Transferring the fragment proved more challenging than anticipated. As soon as it was moved from the station's primary containment field to their portable unit, it began to pulse with an eerie light. Temporal distortions spread throughout the laboratory, causing equipment to age rapidly or revert to earlier states. In one corner, a datapad cycled through its entire manufacturing process in reverse, its components separating and reverting to raw materials. "Stabilize the field," shouted Zeiler, his spindly fingers dancing across the containment unit's controls. "I'm trying," growled Trask, his crystalline body resonating sympathetically with the temporal fluctuations. "The power coupling can't handle the feedback." Throughout the chaos, Rostova remained calm, making minute adjustments to her own controller. Zeiler, inverse the harmonic frequency. Trask, channel the power surge through the auxiliary buffer. The coordinated adjustments gradually brought the fragment under control, though the laboratory showed the scars of their struggle. Equipment melted or transformed into unrecognizable configurations, temporal frost coating surfaces where time had temporarily ceased to flow. Director Xerix stared at them in horror. "That was a minor incident. What do you think will happen when you attempt to actively harvest energy from it?" "That's why we need the temporal field generator," replied Rostova. "It will create a controlled environment for the procedure." "You're all insane," muttered Xerix, but he led them to the secure vault where the generator was kept. Unlike the fragment, the generator was massive, a complex arrangement of gravitational lenses and quantum field manipulators that barely fit through the corridors of their ship. Installing it required removing several bulkheads and reconfiguring the vessel's internal layout. "This technology was never meant to be mobile," complained Trask as he struggled to secure the device. "We're violating at least a dozen engineering principles just by attempting this." "Welcome to the team," said Commander Borak dryly. "Violating principles seems to be our specialty." Once they departed Research Station Gamma, their next challenge was even more daunting, modifying both the generator and their ship to implement Rostova's temporal resonance feedback loop design. The work required precision that would have been difficult in a fully equipped shipyard, let alone the cramped confines of their vessel as it hurtled through hyperspace toward the coordinates Rostova had calculated. Dr. Zeiler and Engineer Trask worked in shifts, each bringing their specialized knowledge to bear on different aspects of the modifications. Commander Borak found himself relegated to an observer role, his military expertise of little use in this scientific endeavor. How did you develop this theory? Borak asked Rostova during a rare, quiet moment. They were alone in the ship's small galley, Rostova reviewing data, while Borak prepared nutritional supplements for the team. It wasn't a single insight, she replied, not looking up from her work. The Rand Nakamura framework provided the foundation, but it required adaptation to account for the specific properties of the Chrono Weavers. Nakamura, repeated Borak. Related to Captain Nakamura from the hive mind incursion? This got Rostova's attention. She looked up, meeting his gaze. His sister. Borak nearly dropped the nutrient dispenser. I served with him. His solution to the hive mind was effective and controversial. Hiroaki always believed unconventional problems required unconventional solutions, said Rostova, a hint of something, perhaps sorrow, briefly crossing her features. We took different paths in the Concorde service, but our approaches remained similar. He never warned us what he was planning, said Borak. One moment, he was quietly analyzing data. The next, he was proposing we turn the hive mind's neural network against itself. And it worked, noted Rostova. Yes, at the cost of an entire star system and all the connected hive nodes. Millions of potentially sentient beings. Rostova's expression didn't change. Would you prefer the alternative? The hive mind had already assimilated 7 Concorde worlds. Projections indicated the entire galactic arm would fall within a year. I'm not questioning the outcome, said Borak carefully. Just a process. The lack of warning. The unilateral implementation of a plan with such devastating consequences. Would extended debate have improved the plan? Asked Rostova. Or just delayed its implementation until more worlds were lost? Before Borak could respond, the ship's alert system activated. Approaching target coordinates. Announced the ship's AI, detecting multiple temporal anomalies consistent with Chrono Weaver signatures. In the command center, the view screen showed a section of seemingly empty space, though the sensor overlays revealed a very different reality. The region was riddled with temporal distortions, areas where time flowed at different rates or in different directions, bubbles where causality itself appeared to break down. The Vega fleet is in there somewhere, said Borak grimly. Or what's left of it? Trask and Dr. Zeiler joined them, both looking exhausted from their marathon engineering session. The modifications are complete, reported Trask, as much as they can be, given the circumstances. The temporal field generator is integrated with the ship's systems, and we've constructed the resonance amplifiers according to the specifications. The containment unit for the fragment has been modified to serve as the energy source, added Zeiler. But I must emphasize that once we activate this system, the theoretical models become less certain. We're entering uncharted territory. Rostova nodded. Understood. Take your positions for the approach. As they navigated deeper into the distortion field, the effects of the Chrono Weavers became increasingly pronounced. The ship's chronometers fluctuated wildly. View screen images stuttered, showing the same space from multiple temporal perspectives simultaneously. Even their own perceptions began to suffer. Words spoken would sometimes be heard before they were said, or actions would seem to repeat with subtle variations. I'm detecting the remains of the Vega fleet, reported Borak, struggling to focus on his console. Their temporal signatures are fragmented, ships existing across multiple time frames simultaneously. Any life signs? Asked Rostova. Borak shook his head. Impossible to determine. The bioreadings are as fragmented as the ships themselves. Begin deployment of the resonance beacons, ordered Rostova. Zeiler, prepare the temporal field generator for activation. Trask, monitor structural integrity. We need to maintain cohesion no matter what happens. The resonance beacons, small devices designed to establish the nodal points of their feedback loop, were launched at precise coordinates calculated by Rostova. Each had to be positioned with exacting precision, creating a complex geometric pattern around the highest concentration of Chrono Weaver activity. As the final beacon was deployed, the ship suddenly lurched, its systems fluctuating wildly. What's happening? Demanded Borak. gripping his console as reality seemed to stretch around them. "The Chrono Weavers are reacting to our presence," replied Xyler, his voice distorting. They're creating a defensive temporal distortion." The view screen showed a terrifying sight, the space around them twisting into impossible geometries as the Chrono Weavers manipulated local space-time. The beacons they had deployed began to drift from their calculated positions, pulled by temporal currents. "Compensate for the drift," ordered Rostova, her fingers flying across her control panel. "Recalculate the resonance pattern based on the new positions." "That's impossible," protested Xyler. "The pattern was calculated with precise." "Just do it," interrupted Rostova, her voice carrying such authority that the Xylosian immediately complied. The situation deteriorated rapidly. The fragment in its containment unit began to pulse with increasing intensity, sending waves of temporal energy through the ship. Equipment aged decades and seconds. In one corridor, a repeating time loop formed, showing the same crew member walking past over and over with slight variations. "The containment field is destabilizing," reported Trask, his crystalline form vibrating with stress. "The fragment is attempting to rejoin the main Chrono Weaver consciousness. Core temperature of the temporal field generator exceeding safety parameters," added Xyler, his voice rising in panic. "Quantum fluctuations increasing exponentially. We're approaching a critical cascade." Commander Borak felt his perception splitting. He could simultaneously see the current crisis and glimpses of potential futures branching out before him. In some, the ship disintegrated in a temporal explosion. In others, they were caught in an eternal loop of this moment, forever trying to activate their device. The fragmentation of his consciousness was becoming unbearable. "Captain," he managed to say, focusing on Rostova with supreme effort, "we need to abort. The plan isn't working. We're losing cohesion." But Rostova appeared unnaturally calm amidst the chaos. While the others struggled with the temporal distortions, she worked with machine-like precision, processing the chaotic data streams and implementing adjustments faster than seemed humanly possible. "Negative," she replied, her voice cutting through the confusion. "The Chrono Weavers are adapting to our approach. We need to adapt in turn." She made a decision that stunned the others. "We're going to synchronize with their pattern instead of fighting it." "Synchronize," repeated Xyler in disbelief. "That's suicide. We'll be absorbed into their temporal field." "Not if we maintain our own resonance frequency while matching their pattern," explained Rostova. "Think of it as harmonic resonance rather than opposition." She began rapidly reconfiguring the system, turning their ship and its experimental device into a component of the very feedback loop they were trying to create. "Trask, reroute all non-essential power to the temporal field generator." "Xyler, invert the phase relationship between the fragment and the generator." "Borak, maintain our position relative to beacon array, regardless of how space-time distorts around us." The commands came in rapid succession, each requiring immediate and precise execution. Borak watched in astonishment as Rostova performed calculations and adjustments that should have required a team of specialists and supercomputers. Her fingers moved across her control panel with inhuman speed, her eyes tracking multiple data streams simultaneously. In that moment, Borak understood why humans were both valuable allies and deeply terrifying. Their capacity to improvise, to discard established protocols in favor of intuitive leaps, made them unpredictable in ways that could be either salvational or catastrophic. The ship groaned under the strain of conflicting temporal forces. Reality itself seemed to be tearing at the seams around them. The view screen showed impossible geometries as space-time contorted under the influence of the Chrono Weavers and their own growing resonance field. "Approaching critical resonance point," announced Xyler, his voice strained. "If this doesn't work." "It will work," stated Rostova with absolute conviction. For one breathless moment, everything balanced on a knife's edge. The ship vibrated with energies that threatened to tear it apart. The fragment in containment pulsed with blinding intensity. Borak felt his very consciousness flickering between past, present, and potential futures. Then, with a sudden shift that was felt rather than heard, the resonance stabilized. The feedback loop established itself, propagating outward through the network of beacons and into the Chrono Weaver manifestations. The effect was unlike anything Borak had ever witnessed. There was no explosive release of energy, no dramatic flash of light. Instead, the Chrono Weavers began to flicker and fade, their temporal signatures unraveling like complex knots being methodically untied. Where once they had distorted space-time with their presence, now they left only ripples of fading temporal energy. The massive distortions began to smooth out, reality gradually reasserting its normal flow. "It's working," whispered Xyler in amazement. "They're actually unmaking themselves." "Not unmaking," corrected Rostova, still focused on her controls. "Resolving. We've amplified their paradoxical nature to the point where they can no longer maintain stable existence in our reality." The process continued for hours, the feedback loop spreading through the entire region affected by the Chrono Weavers. Gradually, the temporal distortions subsided. The wreckage of the Vega fleet settled into a single time frame, revealing the full extent of the devastation they had suffered. When it was finally over, an eerie calm descended upon the ship. The fragment in containment had crumbled to dust, its connection to the now-vanished Chrono Weavers severed. The temporal field generator, pushed far beyond its design capacity, had burned out completely, its core components fused into unrecognizable shapes. The crew was not unscathed. Each showed signs of temporal exposure. Xyler experienced moments of precognition, seeing events seconds before they occurred. Trask found parts of his crystalline body aging at different rates. Borak suffered from persistent déjà vu, reliving conversations that hadn't happened yet. And Rostova appeared unchanged, except for a faint shimmer in her eyes that hadn't been there before, as if she had looked into the heart of time itself, and something of it remained with her. The journey back to Concord space was subdued. They had succeeded beyond any reasonable expectation, yet the experience had left them profoundly altered. Not just physically, but philosophically. They had glimpsed realities beyond the conventional understanding of even the most advanced Concord species. Their return to Galactic Concord headquarters was met with a mixture of relief, celebration, and uneasy silence. A debriefing was immediately convened, with the highest levels of Concord leadership and scientific authority present. "The Chrono Weavers have vanished from all monitored regions of space," confirmed Admiral Zixnath. "The temporal distortions have ceased. By all measurable standards, the threat has been neutralized." The assembled dignitaries and scientists erupted in questions, demanding explanations that could fit within their existing framework of understanding. How exactly did the feedback loop function? What was the true nature of the Chrono Weavers? Could they return? Should this technology be weaponized for future threats? The ethical debates were equally passionate. Some argued that resolving the Chrono Weavers out of existence constituted a form of genocide, the elimination of potentially sentient beings without attempt at communication. Others countered that the entities had shown no signs of conventional intelligence and had caused widespread destruction. Throughout the tumultuous session, Rostova provided factual accounts of what they had done, but offered no philosophical justifications or deeper explanations beyond the technical details. She presented the data, the methodology, and the results with clinical precision. When pressed about the ethical implications, she simply stated, "We faced an existential threat and responded with the most effective solution available. The Chrono Weavers were incompatible with our reality. Their continued presence would have resulted in the collapse of our space-time framework." The response was technically accurate, but struck many as disturbingly detached. The absence of moral wrestling that most species would display when faced with such decisions only heightened the unease many felt toward humanity. In the days that followed, the Galactic Concord struggled to come to terms with what had occurred. Scientific teams pored over the data collected during Operation Temporal Gambit, attempting to understand the principles that had allowed their success. Military strategists debated the implications of temporal warfare and how to defend against similar threats in the future. Politicians argued over new regulations regarding experimental technologies and first contact protocols. Through it all, Captain Rostova was simultaneously celebrated and feared. The High Council awarded her the Stellar Cross of Valor, the Concorde's highest honor for service beyond the call of duty. In the same session, they created a new advisory position for her, consultant on asymmetric strategy and existential threats, a role that would keep her close to Concorde leadership while ensuring her methods remained under careful observation. Dr. Zeiler was offered leadership of a new temporal physics research division, though his experiences had left him changed. He would occasionally stop mid-sentence, responding to questions that hadn't yet been asked, seeing conversations slightly out of sync with present reality. Despite these difficulties, his insights into temporal mechanics were now unparalleled in the Concorde scientific community. Engineer Trask returned to his home world for recovery. The temporal exposure had caused unpredictable crystallization patterns in his silicon-based biology, creating what his people considered beautiful but painful growth formations across his body. He would later return to service, his unique experience making him invaluable for advanced engineering projects, but he would never speak casually of what he had witnessed during Operation Temporal Gambit. Commander Borak found himself in the most difficult position. His official report praised the mission's success and acknowledged the necessity of the actions taken. Privately, however, he struggled with what he had seen, not just the manipulation of fundamental forces, but the cold efficiency with which Rostova had implemented her solution. The ease with which humans accepted and employed strategies that other species would consider unthinkable. 3 weeks after their return, Borak requested a private meeting with Rostova. They met in a quiet observation deck overlooking the vast Concorde fleet in orbit around the capital world. For a long moment, they stood in silence, watching the ships move in their precisely calculated patterns. The Artothian philosopher Kroll once wrote that you can judge a civilization not by its accomplishments, but by what it refuses to do even when facing extinction. Borak said finally, "I've been wondering where humans fall on that spectrum." Rostova considered this, her gaze still fixed on the fleet outside. An interesting perspective. I would argue that refusing viable solutions when facing extinction is not wisdom, but vanity, placing ideological purity above survival. Is there nothing humans wouldn't do to survive? Asked Borak. Of course there is, replied Rostova, but our boundaries may be different from yours. We've had to be adaptable throughout our history. Borak turned to face her directly. The Concorde owes you a debt we can never repay. You saved billions of lives. But I feel compelled to tell you that many among us are now more afraid of humanity than they ever were of the Chrono Weavers. Because we succeeded where conventional approaches failed. Because you did so with such terrifying calm, said Borak. Because the solution came so readily to you, as if weaponizing paradoxes was an obvious approach. Because when the universe was unraveling around us, you seemed most in your element. He hesitated, then added, the next time we face a crisis, and you go quiet like that, studying your datapad while others argue, I think I'll recommend evacuating the sector before asking what you're thinking. Rostova's lips curved in that same small smile Borak had seen before their mission. There's always more than one way to solve an equation, Commander. The Chrono Weavers required a particular approach, and the next threat will require its own solution. She turned back to the viewport. That's why the Concorde is stronger with multiple species, multiple perspectives. Diversity of thought is our greatest advantage. The words were reassuring, but Borak couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial in her tone, some hidden meaning or reservation. As if she were already contemplating problems the rest of them couldn't yet see. Threats lurking beyond the boundaries of conventional perception. They parted with formal respect, their professional relationship intact. But as Borak watched Rostova walk away, he found himself hoping that the next great crisis to face the Galactic Concorde would be something conventional, something that could be faced with fleets and diplomacy and the tested protocols of civilization. Because the alternative, the quiet calculation of humans when standard approaches failed, was becoming the most terrifying prospect in an increasingly uncertain galaxy. As Rostova disappeared around a corner, Borak shivered despite the environmental controls. The title of an ancient human military text he had once studied came unbidden to his mind, on the necessity of thinking the unthinkable. Perhaps that was the true gift and curse of humanity, their willingness to not only think the unthinkable, but to implement it when necessary, to stare into paradox and find not confusion, but opportunity. The Galactic Concord would recover from the Chrono Weaver crisis. New protocols would be established, new technologies developed, new alliances formed. Life would continue its intricate dance across thousands of worlds. But something fundamental had changed in how the older species viewed their newest members. Humans were no longer seen as merely resourceful newcomers with primitive technology and unusual customs. They were now understood to be something far more complex. Allies whose very thought processes contained depths and dangers yet to be fully comprehended. And throughout Concord space, a new wisdom quietly spread among those who had witnessed Operation Temporal Gambit. When the humans fall silent, when they cease their characteristic debate and social interaction, when they grow still and focused and cold, that is when the wise begin to worry. When a human gets quiet, the alien should run.